500,000 law-abiding Americans woke up one morning facing the same legal exposure as violent felons. They hadn't committed a crime, harmed anyone, or even changed their behavior. What changed was a line of text in a federal register. With no vote in Congress, no jury, and no warning, a regulatory agency reclassified private property that had been legal for years into contraband punishable by up to 10 years in prison. This wasn't enforcement of law. It was creation of law by bureaucratic decree, and it shattered the illusion that legality in America is stable or predictable. The man who refused to accept that reality wasn't a political operative or constitutional theorist. Michael Cargill was a firearms instructor and small business owner running a shooting range in Austin, Texas. He did what millions of Americans do every day. He relied on the law as written and on official government guidance as published. Like countless others, Cargill owned bump stocks, simple plastic devices that harness recoil to allow faster trigger manipulation. They do not fire automatically. They do not alter a firearm's internal mechanics. And for over a decade, the federal government repeatedly confirmed they were legal. The Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives reviewed bump stocks multiple times between 2008 and 2017. Each review reached the same conclusion. A machine gun, under federal law, fires more than one round with a single function of the trigger. A bump stock does not do that. Each round still requires a separate trigger function. Manufacturers relied on those determinations. Retailers invested millions. Consumers purchased them openly, paid taxes on them, registered businesses around them, and stored receipts showing they were lawful. Then came October 2017. 58 people were murdered at a music festival in Las Vegas in one of the deadliest mass shootings in American history. The horror was real. The grief was real. And so was the political pressure to act immediately. But instead of Congress debating new legislation, weighing evidence, defining terms, and voting in public, the executive branch chose a shortcut. The president ordered the ATF to reinterpret a statute written in 1934 without changing a single word of the law itself. Within months, the same agency that had said bump stocks were legal for years announced they were now machine guns. Not because Congress changed the definition, but because the agency changed its interpretation. Overnight, hundreds of thousands of Americans were told to destroy their property, surrender it without compensation, or face federal prosecution. The same object went from lawful to criminal based solely on who occupied an office building in Washington. Michael Cargill chose a third option. He sued. His case wasn't about whether bump stocks were good or bad policy. It was about who gets to decide what a crime is in the United States. His lawsuit forced courts to confront a question that had been avoided for decades. Can unelected agencies redefine criminal statutes to expand their own enforcement power? Or does the Constitution reserve that authority to Congress alone? Lower courts split. Some deferred to the agency, arguing that technical complexity justified bureaucratic discretion. Others warned that allowing agencies to define crimes violated basic separation of powers. Eventually, the Supreme Court had no choice but to take the case. When the decision came down in June 2024, it didn't just affect gun owners. It detonated across the entire administrative state. In a 6-3 ruling, the court sided with Cargill. Justice Clarence Thomas wrote the majority opinion, and it was surgical. Congress defined machine guns in clear terms. A machine gun fires multiple rounds with a single function of the trigger. A bump stock does not do that. Speed is not automation. Assistance is not equivalence. Function matters. Text matters. And agencies do not get to rewrite statutes because circumstances change or politics demand action. Thomas went further. He invoked the rule of lenity, a principle older than the Republic itself. When criminal statutes are ambiguous, courts must resolve that ambiguity in favor of the citizen, not the government. If there is doubt, liberty wins. Criminal punishment cannot be built on creative interpretation, evolving standards, or agency convenience. If Congress wants to ban something, Congress must say so clearly and take responsibility for the consequences. That single paragraph changed everything. It wasn't about bump stocks, it was about power. For decades, federal agencies had operated like shadow legislatures, stretching vague statutes to cover new conduct and backing those interpretations with criminal penalties. Cargill told them that era was over. Agencies may enforce the law, but they may not invent it, and courts may not defer when liberty is at stake. The effects were immediate. Federal judges across the country began reassessing regulations built on interpretive expansion rather than clear statutory authority. Rules that relied on phrases like designed to, readily convertible, or functionally equivalent suddenly looked vulnerable. The regulatory framework that had allowed agencies to criminalize behavior through guidance letters and rulemakings started to crack. Manufacturers who had spent millions complying with rules under threat of prosecution filed suit. Retailers reopened product lines they had pulled in fear. Owners who destroyed property under compulsion demanded accountability. Legal scholars across ideological lines acknowledged the shift. Cargill wasn't just a firearms case. It was a constitutional reset, reminding Washington that criminal law flows from elections, not expertise. But the backlash was immediate. If federal agencies could no longer ban through regulation, legislators would do it directly. Within days, bills appeared targeting bump stocks, binary triggers, forced reset triggers, and any device that increased rate of fire. At the state level, lawmakers moved even faster. New bans passed with sweeping language, inconsistent definitions, and severe penalties. Compliance became a patchwork nightmare where legality depended on ZIP code and timing. Today, a firearm configuration lawful in one state can be a felony across a border. Ordinary citizens are expected to navigate dozens of statutes, exceptions, transportation rules, and registration schemes simply to exercise a constitutional right. This isn't accidental, it's strategic. Complexity becomes deterrence, fear replaces prohibition, and most people comply not because the law is clear, but because the risk of getting it wrong is too high. That's the world after Cargill. Federal overreach was checked, but the battle shifted. One centralized threat became 50 fragmented ones. Rights survived in principle, but now face erosion through legal exhaustion. The strategy is no longer to ban outright, but to regulate into surrender. Michael Cargill didn't end that fight, but he forced the system to obey its own rules. He reminded the country that liberty doesn't vanish all at once. It erodes when people stop paying attention to who holds power and how they use it. One man, one lawsuit, one decision rebuilt a constitutional wall that had been crumbling for decades. This wasn't about bump stocks. It was about whether your freedom depends on statutes passed by elected representatives or interpretations written behind closed doors. That distinction matters. Because if agencies can define crimes, then rights exist only until the next emergency. And if you don't understand that, you don't understand how freedom is actually lost.